Tristate tornado is the deadliest tornado in American history. Technically not the deadliest ever. That actually happened in Bangladesh in 1989, though that one's death toll is somewhat disputed. But they were both very bad, and we're dealing with the Tristate one. The Tristate tornado was actually part of a larger outbreak, which by extension was called the Tristate tornado outbreak, which formed on March 17, 1925, and later dissipated on March 19, 1925. The outbreak itself is believed to have spawned around a dozen tornadoes, give or take, since we are talking about 1925 here. Back then, research and technology looking into this phenomena was largely in its infancy. Modern meteorological tools, like Doppler radar for example, simply didn't exist. So pretty much all the data we have is based off of reports from people in the area. But out of the dozen or so tornadoes that spawned, one stood out. Now, the Fujita scale did not exist back then, but a lot of the tornadoes have been retroactively rated based off of the available data. In terms of the specific tornado we are talking about, she is generally considered to be an F5, the only confirmed F5 from the storm system, and that's completely understandable, given how bad she was. Even Ted Fujita himself considered the Tri-State tornado to be an F5 retroactively. But regardless of available tools, people who lived in the area where tornadoes happened knew what they were, as people aren't dumb. But without early warnings, it was a lot more dangerous. You had to rely on your senses, and be able to, well, read a storm, as some people say. People could do it, but in this instance, well, it wasn't really possible. It's probably worth mentioning before we even begin that there's no footage of this tornado, or pictures. We don't know what she looked like exactly. There's only descriptions to go off of. So everything you see is just other historical tornadoes to kind of set the scene, as well as pictures of the damage she did, because those do exist, but there's no images of her directly. The tornado is believed to have began in Reynolds County, west-northwest of Ellington in Missouri, at about 12:45 p.m. or so. The first death would actually occur just 16 minutes later, when a farmer was caught off guard north-northwest of Ellington. Now you'd think a farmer would know better to get out of the way, but this tornado was mean. Real mean. A nasty one, to be sure. Exact wind speeds are of course nearly impossible to know for sure, but based off of a lot of research, they probably exceeded 300 miles per hour. And her average speed moving across the ground was about 60 miles per hour. Sometimes getting as high as 73, which is just horrifying in every conceivable way. Pretty much if you didn't see her coming from several miles out, you weren't getting out of the way of this thing. She headed northeast, moving into Iron County, and hit the mining town of Annapolis, leveling 90% of it in just a few minutes. She then hit another mining town of Ladonna, where she tossed mining machinery all over the place, and destroyed even more buildings. She crossed over into more sparsely populated areas of Madison County, just south of Fredericktown, but this is where she actually started gathering strength. She was getting stronger, not weaker. Upon entering Boilinger County, 32 children were actually injured when 2 schools were damaged. Multiple homes and farms were wiped off the map in Licksville, and she scoured the ground near the town of Sedgwickville. By the time she got to Perry County, she was described by witnesses as having a double funnel. A double funnel is another way of saying she was a multiple vortex tornado, which again contained several vortices, similar to El Reno, and very similar to the much more famous and often referenced Gerald tornado of 1997. It was also an F5 and nicknamed the Dead Man Walking. The Tri-State one probably didn't look like that because she's described as, well, arguably more sinister because she was rain-wrapped for most of it. One of the problems that people were having with this one and why she was killing so many people is that no one really knew she was there until the last possible second. And again, she was moving very fast, so you had to see her to get out of the way. But they couldn't. And the whole thing was described as kind of an eerily moving fog, rather than a tornado. You didn't know she was a tornado until it was too late. She continued her rampage, leveling even more buildings and killing even more people. By the time she'd left Missouri, she killed at least 12, injuring another 200. But she was only just getting started. She then headed into southern Illinois after crossing over the Mississippi River, stripping the bark off of trees and scouring the ground some more. before hitting the riverside town of Gorham at 2:30 p.m. This town was gone. No, seriously, it was gone. There really was nothing left of Gorham after this tornado. It was a complete disaster. 60 of the 80 homes were leveled. Every single storefront was destroyed. The train depot was gone, and 2 of the 3 levels of the school were also destroyed. The remaining 20 houses were severely damaged, and allegedly she ripped the railroad tracks off the ground, and more than half the town was injured or killed. She headed northeast at a very quickened pace, cut a swath almost 1 mile wide through the city of Murfreesboro. This town was a coal shipping center, as well as a railroad hub. Some areas of the town were left with, well, nothing, and the damage she left behind caused fires that engulfed people who were trapped in debris. She'd also managed to destroy the water mains, so in order to quell the blazes, they actually had to use dynamite. And while that kinda worked, it also only caused more damage. 188 people died, 20 of whom weren't ever identified. Total injured was 623. 46 of them would later die, bringing the total death in just Murfreesboro to 234. That itself is actually a record. That's the highest death toll enacted by any tornado of any single city in the United States. But if you thought Tristate was content with that, you'd be wrong. She then headed into the farming town of DeSoto, and just like Gorham, this town was gone. Just gone. There wasn't a town there anymore. And another record was set. 56 people in total in the town were killed immediately. 33 of those deaths were actually just students, kids, who were killed in a partial collapse of the DeSoto school. That's the worst tornadic-related death toll at a single school in American history. After leaving that area, Tri-State tornado clipped the southwest corner of Williamson County and managed to miss the town of Hearst, instead striking the small village of Bush. She actually speared pieces of wood into the town's water tower. Railroad axles were lifted and scattered across the rail yard. Continuing to move east, she crossed into Franklin County, missing the towns of Royalton and Ziegler, but devastating many rural areas, before finally reaching a larger mining town of West Frankfort, winding up in a number of very densely populated neighborhoods. When she passed near the Orient Mine, a large multi-ton coal tipple was actually blown over and rolled. A railroad trestle bridge was torn from its supports, and 300 feet of railroad line was also ripped from the ground and blown wherever. She passed through several other small mining villages, most of which were completely destroyed. In Caldwell, for example, 24 people died. And it was there that, during this whole storm, the heaviest loss to befall a single family occurred. This burden was thrust upon the Caldwell storekeeper, named Isaac I. Carnes. This man lost 11 members of his family. His wife, a married daughter and her husband, a daughter-in-law, and 7 grandchildren, ranging in age from just a newborn to 7 years old. Continuing to move northeast, the tornado leveled another small town called Parrish, and unlike a lot of the preceding towns, many of which were completely destroyed but later rebuilt, Parrish wasn't. Most residents and businesses would simply move on from the area. It's now a very sparsely populated rural community, rather than the thriving town it once was. The twister then continued on, still not content, and smashed into more rural areas across Hamilton and White counties. It was actually in Hamilton County that she reached her greatest confirmed width, at 1.5 miles across. She then crossed over the Wabash River, just south of New Harmony, entering the third state, Indiana. She wiped out the town of Griffin, where not a single structure was left intact, and after exiting that town, she made a slight turn further to the northeast, crossing over to Gibson County, hitting more rural areas, and clipping the northwest corner of Owensville. She then reached a very large factory town known as Princeton, destroying most of the south side. Large sections of the neighborhoods there were completely leveled, and a Heinz factory was very badly damaged. She continued moving, though, more than 10 miles to the northeast, crossing over to Pike County, and finally, at about 4:30 p.m., she lost strength and dissipated. This tornado had remained on the ground for 3 hours and 45 minutes, traveling a distance of 219 miles and killing roughly 695 people, injuring 2,027. The damage inflicted was roughly $17 million. That's $295 million in today's money, which sounds pretty low, but remember, most of these structures were not built to withstand this sort of thing. They were made of cheaper materials, wood, things like that. So while they weren't as expensive to rebuild, they also weren't able to withstand the insane power of this tornado. The aftermath was almost as bad as the tornado itself. Not only had this event managed to kill just so many people, but there were many more left injured, and even more homeless, jobless. There was nothing left of some areas. Hospitals stretching from St. Louis to Evansville were completely overwhelmed with the amount of patients they suddenly started receiving. One of the first things that was actually done was to repair the railroad lines. The Missouri Pacific Railroad in particular started shuttling injured people to other areas with less overburdened hospitals in order to receive treatment, as well as bring in supplies and extra hands to help the survivors rebuild. The Illinois Central Railroad also stepped in. Parrish, which, like I said, was basically annihilated, received help from Thompsonville, 3 miles to the southeast. A team of Illinois Central employees brought a train into the village, along with a physician from Iowa, as well as many supplies. The doctor did what he could on site, and the train was loaded beyond capacity, with dead, injured, and the dying, before they headed northwest to a hospital in Benton. In terms of the Tristate tornado's lasting impact, well, like I said, some of these towns just straight up weren't rebuilt, or were a shell of what they once were, though it has been called into question as to whether or not this was even one tornado at all. Some have argued that this was actually more than one tornado, of the same family, probably the same supercell, but not the same tornado, because, remember, like I said, she was on the ground for 3 hours and 45 minutes. That time frame for a tornado's life cycle is basically unheard of. That's an insanely long time for a single tornado to remain. Some argue, based purely on that this was probably more than one, but others resist it because the track of the tornado is actually seeable. Like, you can see where she went, and it does appear to be the same one, and the same strength overall. And just as many modern meteorologists push for the idea that this was one completely unprecedented, but just one tornado. Regardless of whether it 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't really matter. The damage spoke for itself. The whole thing was a disaster. It affected many lives, took many lives. And it took a very long time for the area to recover from it. I suppose in one way we should simply be thankful we live in a more modern age, where there are many tools and warning systems in place to let people know when storms like this are happening and to get out of the way. That technology just wasn't available back when this happened, which is likely, more than any other reason, why the death toll was so high. Even the strongest tornadoes in the modern day scarcely, if ever, break 100 deaths. Nearly 700 is an obscene amount. But as long as research is ongoing, and the warning systems stay in place and are heeded, I don't foresee a death toll like this ever happening again, at least in the United States. Perhaps a tornado just as strong and just as stubborn, but not one that manages to kill so many. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, and Zach A1 Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Road Videos, Lord Off 444, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Caleb Brainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Zielinski, Jared Brussel, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben Mikola, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Terevel, Hayden DeGrow, Metal for Life Guy, No, Kurt Forcum, Ohio Trucker 1, Mitchell Cole, Mr. Sleepy, Dr. Racer 78, AET Museum, Railroad Preserver 2000, Williard Conklin, Windy City Rails, Liam Wright, Dion Tribal Typhoon, Harry, Hannah Bird, Western Colorado History, Ryan Wehofer, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Murder Dronestall, Kevin Wood, and of course my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.